Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg
Shalom.
And Rabbi Morty Kisus.
Shalom.
This week's episode of the One Pasuk podcast is generously sponsored in honor of Drew Parker by his family, in celebration of the anniversary of his bar mitzvah parsha, and in commemoration of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who the Parker family is proud to be related to. We thank you so much for your sponsorship. If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming episode, please contact the shul. All right, here we go. Our pasuk this week for Parshas Chukas comes from chapter 20, verse 10, Perek Chaf, pasuk Yud. It comes from the story of the hitting of the rock. Vayakilu Moshe v'Aharon es hakahal el pnei hasela. Moshe and Aaron, they assemble the congregation in front of the rock. Vayomer lahem, and he says to them, Shimuna hamorim, listen, you rebels, hamin hasela hazeh notzi lachem mayim. Shall we get water for you out of this rock? The people had been complaining for water in the wake of Miriam's death, and it said that there was not enough water, and so that complaint elicited a strong reaction from Moshe. All right, let's hear what you guys have to say.
Okay. The commentaries debate as to what exactly the sin of the hitting of the rock, what precisely was the sin? We know it's the sin of Me'emediva, but what exactly happened? Harambam highlights the words Shimuna Hamorim. Moshe Rabbeinu, with a certain sense of anger and frustration, told the Bnei Israel that, listen up, you rebels. Now, it's interesting that Moshe would be faulted for this. Before we were on air, Rabbi Pupko was like, they were Morim. They were rebels. They were acting like rebels. So how can we possibly fault Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a tireless defender of Bnei Israel, somebody who at every juncture, no matter what the nature of the sin was, however repulsive it really was, Moshe found merit. And here he's looking at Bnei Israel and he's telling them, Shimu nahamorim, you guys are acting like rebels, listen. And why was it that Moshe Rabbeinu was faulted for this? Now, again, I spoke about Harambam earlier, but Harambam takes us in an entirely different direction, and he focuses on the concept of anger and how one must stay away from it. But if we are trying to understand what exactly Moshe Rabbeinu's sin was, we first have to recognize A, the personality, who he was, his entire life, how he defended Bnei Israel, and B, the truth. They are in fact acting like rebels, and Moshe is trying to put them back in their place. And I once heard the detail here is in the plural, Shimuna Hamorim. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to them as an entire body of people. One could never speak negatively about an entire group of Bnei Israel. Every group in Bnei Israel is sacred. It's possible that within each group there are individuals that deserve to be rebuked and deserve to be called, listen up, you rebel. But we can never ever say, listen up, you rebels. And Moshe Rabbeinu, in his unbelievable madrega that he ultimately reaches, and somebody who was truly a defender of Bnei Israel, made this mistake. In fact, he was right. It was true. They were acting like rebels. But we can't call out an entire group of people. Often we look around and there are other elements of the Jewish nation. And maybe it's to the right or to the left, and we can think, these people, they live life not according to the Torah, and those people live life not according to the Torah. We have the perfect balance. Sometimes those points that we raise may in fact be true. But it's our attitude of how we go about conveying. We have to be in awe of a group of Am Yisrael. We have to have this sacred understanding of who a group of Bnei Israel is. And if we have an attitude of Shimuna Hamorim, we too will be punished. And therefore we have to understand that the fault was in identifying a broader group and pointing that out. We have to treat every single sect amongst Am Yisrael as holy Jewish people.
That's beautiful. First of all, I love the framing of the question because I never thought of it that way. It's very straightforward the way you put it, but I've always thought of the question, usually the question is, why should Moshe be punished so severely for what seems to be a minor infraction? But I like your question better. Moshe, who's been defending the people, who's been their primary advocate, for him to call them rebels, he already has a lot in his bank account in terms of the way he looks favorably on Bnei Israel. I love that. And your message is such an important message today because we do more stereotyping than ever. And it's easy, and it's lazy, and it's unfair, and we write off a whole group just because of the actions of some who we believe all of a sudden represent all of them, and it's such an important message.
I'll tell you a story. I once had someone who was helping us, an Ozeret, a housekeeper who was in our home, and she was talking with another family, had their own Ozeret, and the two of them were talking. And so one was from Jamaica and one was from St. Lucia. Anyway, so I was driving the woman who was working for us, I was driving her to the bus, and I said, what did you think of this other woman? And she said, she's a typical Jamaican. That's what she said, right? A big personality. She grouped all of Jamaica, right? She's like a typical Jamaican. And then I said, but you're from St. Lucia, so what does it mean to be like a typical St. Lucian? And she's like, well, it depends if you're from the North Shore or from the South Shore. So I'm like, so the closer you get to any group, the more you see the nuances, the different. She's all of Jamaica, it's just typical, right? So it was like that to me is like the quintessential story of like other people we can group into big baskets, but once you're part of your own community, you see there's so many gradations.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, though, that in times of tragedy, we're all willing to put aside our differences. I remember Rabbi Kalish said a story right after October 7th. He was driving with his boys, and they were in some random rest stop in an area of Connecticut that you should never see a Jew, let alone a chassid. And he walks up to the chassid, and he says, "Can I give you a hug? You have no idea how happy it makes me to see another Jew." And he says, on October 6th, if I saw this chassid, I don't even know if I would have said hi. It's strange. You're in my rest stop. I live around here. You're not from here. I don't know what you're doing here, but whatever. What do we have to do with each other? But he said, I looked at him and I was in awe of this Jew. I was like, oh my gosh, another Jew. And we looked around. It was across the board. No one cared. You're Jewish. You have some affiliation with Judaism. We want to just lean in. And it's unfortunate that that's what sometimes brings this about. But when we have those moments of clarity and we recognize what a privilege it is to belong to these people and how every element of Bnei Israel really makes up this broader group and what makes us so unique, it's a very powerful idea just to be a part of that, just to know that we're all a part of that story.
Yeah, part of it is also a sense of feeling kind of vulnerable and exposed and realizing we're in this together in a way that you don't always feel when you're in your insular community. I always felt this when I was in YU. So you're in YU, you're surrounded by from Jews, and you have your set of friends, and you have all sorts of people that you don't see, and for better or for worse, just human nature, you don't acknowledge when you pass them by in YU, because I don't know you. I would walk from YU to a bus stop. There's a little bus that goes to Teaneck, because it goes on Route 4. Anyway, so I'd walk to the bus stop. Once you exit the environs of YU, so now you're in Washington Heights, right outside of YU. When you see another Jew on the street, you say hello. You give a nod. You acknowledge. There's a kinship there. That same person I would see 3 blocks away in YU, I wouldn't pick my head up because we're just two Jews in the same insular. But once you feel like, no, we're actually like kind of adrift in a much bigger world and like we have each other, then you see each other. And so I think that's also like a little bit of the effect of like us feeling like we're profoundly vulnerable here and we're in this together.
Yeah, when you leave a Jewish area and you see another Jew, your Judar automatically goes on.
Bing, bing, yeah. Yeah. I was thinking of sharing actually a different thought, but I'll dovetail with you a little bit more seamlessly by asking that same question. How is this moment something that Moshe was punished for so stringently? Why was this kind of the moment that totally set Moshe on a different course? And I saw a very beautiful idea from a Rav Shmuel Yaakov Rubinstein. He makes a connection which I had never seen before, which I thought was so interesting and so compelling. He says that the Medrash in Shmos Rabbah describes the moment that Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen when he finds the burning bush. It describes a moment where a little lamb had run off from his flock, and Moshe runs after it off into a distance and finds it drinking water, and he realizes, oh, it was thirsty, and so he picks it up, and at that moment he sees the burning bush, basically. And you always focus on the fact that Moshe was running after. There's different elements of this medrash that are well known, but what this particular sefer picks up on is that Moshe's selection, this moment when Moshe kind of collides with Hashem in this very important way. Moshe's selected because in that moment, instead of being frustrated at this animal that ran off, Moshe saw that it was drinking and recognized, the reason why this animal went astray is because it was thirsty. He saw the need. He saw that sense of urgency, that was what was driving what was ostensibly an act of rebellion. An animal runs away from the flock. But Moshe could see, no, it's thirsty. And it's actually an exact parallel here where Moshe sees the rebellion, but he doesn't see the legitimate thirst. In this moment, what Moshe is blind to is he doesn't see that behind the rebellion is actually a real need. And when you are unable, at the moment that Moshe is unable to continue to see that, that's when he's no longer the optimal leader for the Jewish people. I say all this very, very carefully. I want to speak about Moshe Rabbeinu with whenever we speak about Moshe's sin or his error, you do so in a certain careful way. I'll share. I was a summer rabbinic intern in the RJC, and I was giving a Parshas Shir on this parsha. And I was speaking, I was to a group of women. They were retirees. We were like a small group of like 6 bubbies. We were sitting with a stone chumash and having a discussion. And I spoke a little too comfortably, maybe coarsely, about Moshe Rabbeinu's sin. And like they winced. And like that wince taught me a lot. And I've carried that moment with me all these years later. So I speak, cautiously about Moshe Rabbeinu's sin or failure or mistake in this moment. But if perhaps it is an indication of him no longer being the suitable leader for the Jewish people to lead them to the next stage, perhaps it's because the very nature, that very quality that made him a suitable leader, as this medrash describes, seeing the issue, seeing the vulnerability, seeing the need behind the complaint, behind the rebellion. So in this moment, he fails to have that, to express that same depth of vision. And so I think that's a very beautiful way to think about this moment and its implications.
It reminds me of what it says in Pirkei Avos when we say, "Have done as kol ha'adam l'kaf schus." You should judge every person favorably. There's that observation. It says kol ha'adam, right? That in order to judge someone favorably, you have to look at the entire person,
right.
Kol ha'adam, their entire situation, their entire context, exactly as that beautiful word says.
Beautiful.
Love it.
That's like the Sfat Emet, al tadin et chavercha ad shetegi el mkomo. You're not allowed to judge your friend until you come to his place. Says the Sfat Emet, never judge your friend because you'll never be in his place. So trying to attempt to judge kol ha'adam, it's just not realistic. You didn't grow up in his house. You didn't have his traumas. You didn't have her experiences. You don't know who their friends were. You don't know anything. And so it basically says, like, take a step back and don't get involved at all.
It's a little bit like don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes, at which point you're a mile away and you've got his shoes.
But you could almost read that literally because don't judge a person until you're in his place. That's, according to that medrash, that's how Moshe succeeded. He didn't judge the lamb until he was in the lamb's place
and you saw
seeing what he was doing.
Very nice.
Nice. So I was also thinking about the question of why Moshe and Aaron were punished so severely for hitting the rock. The pasuk says later that they failed lahakti sheni, to sanctify Hashem, and Rashi cites the medrash there that says, how did they fail to sanctify Hashem? What was their chil Hashem? What was their desecration of Hashem? It's that they could have taught Bnei Israel a lesson. Had they spoken to the rock and not hit it, they could have taught them the lesson that of what it means to listen to the word of Hashem. But I thought of a question this year I never thought of, and that is, okay, so they failed to teach that lesson, but by hitting the rock and water coming out, that's also a kiddush Hashem. That's a miracle. That's something that would have strengthened their emunah, their faith in Hashem to whatever degree, and that would have been an amazing thing. So I saw something in the Netziv where he gives more detail to this story, which I thought was very interesting. He said this rock wasn't just any rock. This was the rock that had been supplying them with water since the beginning of their journey. This is the rock that was referred to as Be'er Miriam, the well of Miriam, in her merit that they no longer had because she died. And what Moshe became angry about is that Had the people not lost the merit to have water at that moment in the way that they were behaving, and had Moshe not gotten angry at them, Moshe would have summoned the clarity to rebuke them, not that he would have hit the rock, but rather he would have known that the appropriate way to guide Bnei Yisrael is that they should daven, and that if they daven for the return of the water would return. But because he got angry, he wasn't able to summon that clarity of thought, and that was his major failing. And that moment was a moment in which he could have taught them the power of tefillah, and in failing to do so, that was a terrible transgression. And what I found so interesting about this approach is that it recognizes the very human concept of not being at our best when we are angry, when we have very strong emotions. And there's two lessons in that. Number one, for our own selves and our own awareness, that if we happen to be worked up about something, to remind ourselves that we're never at our best. You know, some people, they're worked up about something and they write a letter, they write an email, and then they'll put it aside. And then when they calm down, they'll realize, I don't want to say any of this. That's one lesson. And the other lesson is for people on the other side, that, you know, if you're getting it from somebody, but you know it's an extremely stressful moment, people are not at their best in those stressful moments. And to make that space and to be able to be patient with a loved one, with a friend in those contexts, fosters really, really strong relationships.
Yeah, and I just add, Moshe had just lost his sister.
Oh.
Which I always think is a very important factor in thinking about this moment, and you've articulated it so beautifully. So it's not only just a moment of lachatz, of anxiety, of stress, where's the water, but it's also like Moshe was mourning.
Yeah. Yeah, the sister who had saved his life. The sister who watched out for him. Yeah.
So that's important, definitely important context. It's interesting. It's almost like the inversion of this moment, if you want to look at it from a very positive standpoint. It's that, you know, Moshe deviated in this way. It seems so small. But it's almost like the exception that proves the rule, which is to say for 40 years, Moshe was the absolute perfect, pristine vehicle, every single hair's breadth, you know, of everything that Hashem told him to do. It was exact and perfect and pristine. And so the fact that the one time he makes a mistake and it's marginal, right? It's hitting the rock versus speaking to the rock. If we view that is the kind of the core moment of this episode. So it almost like is a kind of eidos, a kind of testimony to perfection of Moshe for the 40 plus prior years.
Yeah. And a certain kind of perfection, because no matter what you hold, in terms of the interpretation of the story, of the sin, of the punishment, at the end of the day, everyone agrees that Moshe failed in doing something, and he doesn't merit to enter the land. And so even someone as great as Moshe, lo kam navi od k'Moshe, even so, every person's fallible. And obviously none of us can be like Moshe Rabbeinu, but in this one respect, Moshe Rabbeinu is in the same bucket as all of us, humans who make mistakes and sometimes have to suffer the consequences of those mistakes. And 100%. Thank you all so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed. If you're interested in sponsoring a future episode, please reach out to one of us. And of course, please send us your feedback. Shabbat Shalom and Good Shabbos from the One Pasuk Podcast.